Code blue, room 305.
So I just want to start with an excerpt from my book. Okay. Breathe. You need to breathe. She's not breathing on her own. The nurse grabs my hand, calls for help, and continues to repeat to herself, Melanie, you need to breathe. This is when I realize what is happening. I'm dying. I can hear everyone around me telling me to breathe as I lay there thinking, I am breathing. I can't talk, my eyes remain closed. No matter how hard I try to tell them, it's okay, I am breathing. I'm fading and it's happening quick. I lay there realizing I don't know how to breathe. Peace runs through my veins as the oxygen dissipates, and then it happens. I'm gone. I'm dead. It's dark and it's peaceful. This was the single best feeling I've ever had. The relief, the chaos, the stress of life, failure, it's gone and can never hold power over me again.
Sometimes the chaos of life, the pain, the loneliness, particularly when you're running from your story, can feel all-consuming.
I think that when you're trying to put up a front, when you're trying to live this life that's not authentic, it's not real, it's just this painted picture, and you're trying so hard to be perfect and everything that everybody else wants you to be and that you think you should be, it's exhausting. So I think, yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired. Do I really want to keep doing this? So I think that, God, I hate even saying it, but yeah, I've had moments where it's like, I'd be better off dead. People around me would be better off without me being here. And that's hard to admit. Have I ever done anything? No. Have I laid there and thought about it? Yeah. Yeah.
I think we'd be surprised by how many people have had those same thoughts.
Did it ever cross your mind to end your own life?
Yeah.
Ultimately, those thoughts stem from shame, the enduring feeling of unworthiness caused from feeling so isolated in our experiences. I've had those thoughts, and almost every single person I've interviewed for Uncovered has expressed similar moments where their mind wanted to convince them that death or injury might be the only thing to bring them relief, to get them help for an all-consuming addiction, or to prove their worth in the darkest times.
Part of breaking a universal cycle, right? The taboo things that we're not supposed to talk about, well, I think we have to talk about them. Because like you said, there are so many people, well, I think most people, if they're being honest, have thought maybe life would just be better if they weren't there. And how do we support each other through that?
This is a story that shines a light on a much better way out of the darkness, and how uncovering the truth not only can set you free, but also bring purpose through finally understanding you are not alone.
I don't think that I had ever fully been honest with myself about a lot of things, but your whole life's a secret. Being honest with people about things that you're ashamed of, like that doesn't sound like a good idea, but you're gonna live in that shame alone and you'll die there. I don't wanna die in that shame. I want that peace that I felt.
The peace that Melanie felt happened during a near-death experience in a hospital room after a serious operation.
So with the delivery of our fifth child, my uterus and a lot of my other organs prolapsed out with the baby. We didn't quite know the extent of it until a few weeks later when my insides started to literally fall outside of my body.
Melanie's prolapse was so severe she had devastating physical side effects, and initial doctor visits couldn't provide much hope either. She was even told that perhaps her best option was to file for disability and get a colostomy bag.
Facing the fact that I physically would never be the same again was probably one of the hardest moments of my life. I saw my life ending.
Finally, she found a team of surgeons in Seattle who believed they could help. Melanie would need 23 different procedures, all scheduled to happen in the same surgery. But more complications caused her to have to go back for a second surgery. And that's when the unexpected happened. While trying to bring her out of anesthesia, her lungs collapsed, leaving her without oxygen for nearly 3 minutes. A trauma that has left her with cognitive symptoms on top of the physical symptoms she was already dealing with.
I really struggled after all of that. I couldn't connect my thoughts to what I wanted to say, and I still struggle with that. So waking up and finding out that my biggest milestones now were you have to be able to go to the bathroom on your own, or walk the hallway, or communicate how you're feeling. I felt like I was losing anything that made me me. And it was like, well, who am I? I don't know.
It's a terrifying question we can all find ourselves unable to answer when the things we've clung to outside of ourselves to feel a sense of worth fall away. But in the midst of the despair of having an identity crisis, Melanie's near-death experience was strangely bringing forth a newfound hope, a vision for peace she had never thought possible before.
That first kind of paragraph in my book was actually the hardest paragraph to write and to come to terms with. It sounds terrible. You read it and you're like, death was the best experience you'd ever felt. Like, that's sad. And I don't mean it in the sense that I wish I would have died. I mean it in a sense that having that feeling of that calm and that silence and that peace was a very eye-opening experience to me. I want that peace, but I want it while I'm alive. You shouldn't have to die to get that, but you have to be able to face a lot of hard things to get there. I had to start figuring out who I am. I can't live for anyone else or on their terms anymore. I can't keep all this inside me and struggle with it alone.
Figuring out who she was would require the uncovering of secrets, finally facing the parts of her story she'd been running from her entire life.
For so many years, keeping secrets was kind of like the thing, right? So it just is a generational thing. You just pass those things along until you slowly start to break those walls down.
This is Melanie Warman's story, but she asked her mother, Leslie Lowe, to join to highlight the truth she just mentioned, that every generation of parents will unconsciously pass on negative traits to their children, and these patterns repeat themselves from generation to generation until someone is finally brave enough to bring them to light. And so to understand Melanie's story, it's first important to understand Leslie's story.
I was brought up to be the good girl. And if you just keep your mouth shut, don't cause any problems, don't make any waves. But after a while, you just start to die a little bit inside. And you just don't even know what you like or what you want or what you believe anymore, because you've spent your whole life making sure everybody else is good and doing what they want. Until you get to a point where you can't do it anymore. And so I think Melanie learned a lot of traits or top behaviors by watching me obsess about food or the way I looked. And I feel a lot of guilt and shame about that. And I think that she also learned how to keep secrets from me, because I kept secrets. I wasn't honest about what I was doing or the lengths or that I was going through to be this perfect person. And so I wouldn't talk about things. They just thought that I was fine all the time. So she learned not to talk about things, because you're just supposed to be fine all the time. So I feel bad about that she didn't feel like she could talk about it.
Shame is a funny thing, because in many ways, Leslie had been honest and vulnerable, sharing about her struggles with eating disorders since the late 1990s, a time when it was even more taboo to talk about your struggles. But being vulnerable about our actions and behaviors doesn't necessarily mean we're healing the reason we feel shame in the first place.
I would say the eating disorder stuff and the body image issues really came from gymnastics. You kind of taught each other how to throw up, and you wouldn't eat for days. And you pick up on the subtleties, right? It's like, oh, they're getting praised and attention because they've lost weight or they're holding at a particular weight. And I can look at them and go, oh, well, they're skinny. And I'm getting, you probably should lose a few pounds. I think that you're a little heavy for your height. So you pick up on the subtleties and you start to swing into, oh, I'm bad, they're good. I need to be them. I can't be me. There's something wrong with me.
There's something wrong with me. It's a voice of shame comparing you to everyone else. And it tries to convince you you're the only one struggling with something. It tries to convince you not to be honest with anyone around you, or even yourself.
I don't know if I've ever been completely honest about it. Yeah. I would say that I had moments where it was really bad. I remember after we moved to Spokane, and I was just all over the place. I was probably overwhelmed as a mom, living in a new town. Wasn't really in a healthy relationship, and we'll just say that. And I felt like I was falling apart. And I did check in to a hospital for a little bit so that I could get some help and get on top of it.
That must have been hard.
That was super hard. Yeah, that was really hard. I was there for 2 weeks, and I was like in a time nobody would do those things.
Despite Leslie's courage and attempt to be open about her eating disorder, she couldn't fully shake the chains shame had put her in. In some ways, she was still trapped on a hamster wheel, chasing perfection in exchange for fleeting moments of worthiness.
Obsessive compulsive, very much so. The kids grew up in that environment, and I can see that now, but I didn't realize that they were living with that. And if it wasn't perfect and things didn't look good, then I felt ashamed. And it's funny, it's like layering things on top of each other. Why do you feel that way? You're not looking at it at the time. It's like, well, if things aren't perfect, then I'm not perfect. And then somebody will find something wrong with me. And I don't want people to think that my life, just because I work in television, that my life is perfect. It has been so far from perfect. So far from perfect. Yeah, I haven't been the perfect person, or, I don't feel like I've been the perfect mom. It's hard.
And in some ways, working on television has made the struggle to have a healthy relationship with food and body that much harder.
I think it's always there. I don't think it ever goes away. It really doesn't. And then it's interesting that I put myself in a position where people judge you on how you look. And it's amazing how bold people can be. I got an email from somebody, it was a Facebook message, and she just said, and mind you, this is through COVID, and I had a business and the shutdowns and life was crazy, and again, in an unhealthy relationship. I was probably drinking too much because you're at home, and I had gained weight. And she very rudely said, look at you, you look fat. And you're like, okay, well, I knew I was struggling, but to have you say something like that was really hurtful. It was a moment where I thought, okay, I have to get control of this. And I did swing too far back the other way and lost quite a bit of weight. Then when I lost too much weight, I was getting messages, are you sick? Are you okay? And then what point do you get to where you go, okay, it's time to love myself?
If there were whatever things that you feel like you very blatantly want to get out in front of you with the truth of your story, what would that be?
I've struggled most of my life, I would say, with self-esteem and body image and having that imposter syndrome. I'm a people pleaser to a fault. I've been in horrible relationships because I didn't trust my instincts. And it painted the picture I wanted it to paint, but it wasn't me.
And that is the cycle Melanie is breaking, refusing to continue to paint a perfect picture. Brené Brown says when you deny your story, it defines you, while you stand outside of it, hustling and pretending for your worthiness. But when you own your story, you get to write the ending. Over the last couple years, Melanie has worked hard to not only own her story, but identify and heal the subconscious beliefs that invited so much shame into her life in the first place. And today, she's quite literally writing an incredible ending. What's about to follow are all the stories Melanie knew she had to own to finally embrace and love herself.
I've always felt so desperate to be loved, and this is embarrassing to say, but it was like, I've been married several times. And I hear people say things like, oh God, that's embarrassing for her. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know why I did that. I don't even know why I did that. I knew I shouldn't have done that. I just wish that I would have loved myself enough to be like, this isn't right. Wait for what's right. I got married knowing that it was a bad idea, that it wasn't the right thing. I think too many times I would convince myself that I could pretend forever and that would be okay. And that, it's not fair to anyone involved, especially kids. And in my relationship now, we've been married for going on 7 years. It's the longest relationship, but I've also never worked on myself until now. But honestly, it's sad because I didn't even want to have a wedding when I got married last time because I was embarrassed to invite people. That wasn't fair to my husband. But I was like, there is no way I'm doing that. I didn't even tell anyone. That shame held me back from what should have been a celebration. And shame's held me back from doing a lot of things. Whether it's I'm feeling like I'm overweight right now, I'm not gonna go to your Christmas party because I don't want anyone to see me until I fix this. And that's how I've lived my life.
To pave a new way, Melanie had to ask herself a lot of tough questions.
What are all of the problems? What are all of the reasons why I don't like who I am? I knew that I needed to find the root kind of all of these things that I was struggling with that I had been hiding for so long.
Her reflection would take her all the way back to her childhood.
Melanie has been defiant since the minute she was born. She was not an easy baby. As a teenager, she was rebellious and in trouble all the time. All the time. And I look back on that now and I can see how she was paving her own way. But it wasn't easy. Melanie was defiant. Melanie always wanted to push that boundary.
I was continuously messing something up or making an erratic decision and ruining everything.
Now, as I hear her interview and she goes through externally the chaos that she recognizes that she put people through, she knew she was causing trouble for people. but internally, she was feeling a totally different way. So have you guys had conversations about that, or through reading her book and stuff, like what is that like to finally have a peek inside the window that your daughter really had not let people inside of before?
I think that that's the hard part for me. As a mom, you think that you know everything that's going on with your kids, right? But you don't recognize or see that this internal turbulence that's going on, that's creating all of this chaos, is something more than it just rebellion, right? I never recognized that Melanie might be ADHD or struggle with the compulsive things. Now when I look back, I go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But at the time, they didn't test kids for that, really. It was kind of a shame thing, too. And I never thought to have any of the kids tested for that. I just thought Melanie was rebelling against everything. But I see the turmoil now, and I feel bad that I didn't have a better handle on what was happening with her.
According to AttitudeMag.com, a website dedicated to ADHD awareness and resources, for people with ADHD, shame arises from the repeated failure to meet expectations from parents, teachers, friends, bosses, and the world. And it's estimated that those with ADHD receive 20,000 corrective or negative messages by the age of 10. So it's common that those who struggle with ADHD start to view themselves as fundamentally different and flawed, believing they're not like other people. Melanie wouldn't be diagnosed with ADHD until much later in life, but it was the diagnosis that made so many behaviors finally make sense.
Knowing now what I didn't know then, I can understand why my behavior was certain ways. Like if they put me in piano or singing, I would try really hard, but I couldn't stay focused on it and I couldn't figure out why. So then I would do something ridiculous or draw attention in the wrong way. I'm supposed to be at this serious recital and I'm gonna ruin it and I'm gonna do something to make everybody laugh and get out of doing the actual performance. So when I say I was out of control, it was like, I didn't know why I couldn't do what was expected of me. I didn't know why I couldn't focus on the things I was supposed to be doing in school. And that's really when I started to struggle a lot with like the hair pulling. I've been pulling my hair out since I was really young, like elementary school. I can't exactly pinpoint when it started, but I, for the longest time, thought that nobody else in the world did that. Then I found out there's a term for it and it's trichotillomania. I did get taken to counseling one time, and then the place that I went didn't know what I was talking about and made me feel like I just needed to stop doing it, like it was my fault. And so it made me feel like I must be the only person in the world that has this problem and there's something wrong with me. So I'm gonna live with it and I'll never talk about it again. I sat in this very dark place for a long time, just thinking there's so many things wrong with me. Growing up in a world where I felt like looks define you. So when I couldn't ever meet, when my looks weren't defining me because I was struggling immensely, I felt like nothing. I was just worthless.
Melanie was able to pinpoint that that was actually her core issue. She only felt like she could present herself to the world when she looked a certain way.
With growing up in the public, my mom being a major person at one of the biggest news places locally.
I'm Leslie Lowe with a look at that weather forecast as we.
She's beautiful, she's outgoing, she's nice, everyone knows who she is. But sometimes it was also very difficult, kind of living in that shadow a little bit. And I felt like I didn't even have a name most of the time. It was just, oh, that's Leslie's daughter. And that was hard. So I was like, well, I am, but I'm also my own person. And struggling my whole life to find that and not ever knowing what that looked like for me. I wanted to be just like her, but I couldn't be. because that wasn't who I was. Sometimes it felt like standards that I could never obtain. Grew up with my mom in pageants, swimsuit competition, that was normal. It made me very aware of how I should look. When people would say you look like your mom, or I would go blonde, that was always a very proud moment for me. I was like, I do, but when people would say things like, oh, I never would have guessed that you were her daughter, you guys don't look anything alike, that would devastate me. I would panic. I would change my hair color. I just felt like there were so many things that I was going to have to do to be important. I thought that's what made you important.
They're absorbing everything around you and what you're doing. I don't think we don't realize that as parents, and like the pageant stuff. It was such an interesting time, and I can look at it now and go, okay, I was doing that to try to find my own self-worth, and realizing too that I was conforming myself to be this person that I knew that the pageant world wanted me to be. And so I can definitely see where Melanie would have picked up on how I was paying close attention to my weight, how I looked and how I dressed and what I did, and even how I walked and talked.
Perhaps the biggest secret Melanie was determined to hide was her struggle with food.
I feel like I've struggled with eating disorders since I was 9 years old. Gymnastics that was my main sport. I did it for 14 years, and I ended up being good at it, and I did love it. But it was just my first instinct to compare myself to the other girls. It was just part of that culture. It was pretty common for half the girls on the team you'd hear them throwing up in the bathroom, and that was just normal. I remember we were working on doing Supermans, which is where you go all the way around the bar. So the coach said something along the lines of, well, the lighter girls are gonna do better in competition because they can go around the bar quicker. And I felt like they were telling me, like, you're not going to be helping with our team sport because it takes a lot more momentum to get your body around the bar. And that was the first time I remember feeling like I was called out for my weight, or that it was a setback because I'm bigger than the other girls. So it was, anything like that was a huge trigger for me. And then that's when it would go back into, I'm either gonna throw up what I eat if I eat something, or I'm gonna starve myself, but then I'm gonna get so hungry and then I binge. So even when anyone would try to talk to me or think I had an eating problem, I would avoid it because I didn't even know how to pinpoint what my problem was. I was doing all of it. It wasn't I was anorexic, it wasn't I was bulimic, it wasn't that I was a binge eater, it was everything.
Did I know things were going on? Yeah. Could we have an honest conversation about it? No. And I didn't push, because I didn't want to upset her.
The last thing I would ever want to do would be to tell somebody that I am struggling with something. I was out of control in so many ways, so if I could pretend to be fine in certain areas and shine in those areas, because that was something I was proud of, unfortunately. When I was so skinny that people were worried about me, I was proud of that. I was like, I did a good job, and they think that I am just skinny, and they don't know how much work I put into it.
In a way, eating disorders are an addiction of their own kind. It's not an illegal substance or alcohol where recovery will come when you can finally stop using. With an eating disorder, it's like your mind becomes convinced that food is your worst enemy, but also your drug of choice. So much energy goes into not eating. But we have to eat to survive. And so what most people don't realize is that binging will almost always follow restriction. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you don't have self-control. It's your body's way of surviving. But we also live in a world that praises, elevates, and even gives privilege to people who can control what they look like, thus reinforcing one of the most self-loathing behaviors, neglecting to feed yourself, as if it were something to strive for. And for this reason, oftentimes people with eating disorders won't ask for help or even admit to their problem, because doing so would require them to give up the thing the world praises them for. Melanie remembers this feeling, a refusal to seek help for something that was destroying her physically, mentally, and emotionally.
My mom had called and, the news wanted to do a story on me and my family going Black Friday shopping, and it was going to be a lot of fun, and they were doing fun prompts, and it was a good time. But at that time, I was also really struggling with my eating disorder, and being on camera for me was very intimidating, and only to show up to it and pass out at Old Navy while in line, while on camera, because I had been starving myself. And then all of a sudden I was being woken up with one of those things, and everyone was kind of wondering what happened or what was going on. And I couldn't tell them. I had to tell them, don't take me in an ambulance. There's nothing medically wrong with me. But I couldn't out loud say, I've just not been eating. I wasn't gonna ever tell anyone that I had an eating disorder. And to feel like that almost came out and I couldn't keep my secret anymore because it was on camera during this thing we were doing for my mom's work. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I put her in that situation. It was just, I was very ashamed. And I knew that I wasn't going to quit that behavior. So I didn't want to say it, because then I would get help. And I didn't want help. I wanted to be fit.
And that's what shame convinces us to do. We become unable to look in the mirror and own our truth. So we cling to whatever mask will give us a temporary feeling of power or worthiness, even when those masks are suffocating us to the point of wanting to disappear.
Oftentimes when I think back on my patterns of behavior and everything that I've gone through, I'm embarrassed and I don't feel like there's any fixing it. Even though my surgeries that I had were delayed a little bit as far as postpartum or what could be considered postpartum, I still fully believe that I had postpartum psychosis even. And I tried driving my car off of what I thought was an embankment. It was a ditch. I spent hours on the phone on the suicide hotline. It's just, you get to a point and you're like, I feel like I've messed everything up so bad. There's no fixing it. So what's the point if I'm gonna keep sabotaging myself and everyone around me?
Life is like a roller coaster, right? It has the ups and the downs, and if you can just hang on, in the down times, then you're gonna go back up again. And sometimes hanging on just means if you need to pull the covers over your head for a day and just take a time out, then you do that. If it means throwing on some chick flick and working through it that way, do it. If it means eating a gallon of ice cream, do it, It's like, just do what you have to do to hold on, knowing that there will be an upswing again. It's not gonna always stay there.
At the end of the day, I can't change anything that I've done. All I can do is be honest with myself and my husband and my kids and my family and everyone around me that look, I get that I've been a mess most of my life, and we've spent a lot of time covering up that side of me and only showing the world one side of me. But it's not true. It's a lie.
Melanie's been on a journey of slowly peeling back the layers to face her truth without running from it. And finally understanding her struggles from a neuroscience perspective has also helped her to heal.
Somebody told me one time that there's like 3 layers to a person, and it's your top layer, and that's the show that you put on for everyone. And then there's, a layer a little bit deeper where you let people know a little bit about yourself enough for them to feel connected to you. And then there's the deepest level, and that's who you really are. And a lot of what I think I struggled with too is I felt like me wasn't okay. I mean, I have gone so many times into doctor's offices, psychiatrist offices, psychology offices, counselors, basically begging them to diagnose me with something. Like, I have to be manic. I have to be bipolar. Like, there's got to be a reason my behavior is the way that it is. And it was frustrating not getting those answers. It literally took somebody saying to me that pulling my hair out was a compulsive response to an obsessive thought, and that sentence changed my life. Because I have a whole room of self-help books, and I was like, how do I have a compulsive disorder? How do I have an eating disorder? How do I have trichotillomania? How do I have OCD? How do I have ADHD? Like, how could that many things be wrong with one person? But that one sentence made me realize they're all connected. Since that moment of just that one sentence, it made my whole life make sense. I went through a grieving process with it, thinking had I understood myself for more of my life, I may have not been as chaotic. But you can't think like that. You have to think forward because you can't change that. So it was just realizing that the power that comes with educating yourself about all the things that I struggle with, those things are always going to be a part of me. So getting myself educated allows me to utilize those struggles in a different way. And someone once even said to me that ADHD can be a superpower. I can hyper-focus.
Over the last 3 years, Melanie has written 9 children's books, and she's recently released a cookbook with vulnerable short stories sprinkled throughout, as well as her first memoir. And the most inspiring thing about all of it is the path she took to get there. Because funny enough, Melanie has always wanted to write a book, but she never gave herself permission previously to do so. Coming out of that near-death experience, though, and facing challenges with communication, while also trying to be honest with herself for the first time, motivated her to try.
I was struggling with talking and putting what I was thinking into communicating, and it was just kind of, I'm gonna do it. I think that the most important thing that I've taken away from it is that I feel like I spent so much of my life having these huge ideas of what I should be that they almost seemed out of reach. And learning to actually just take baby steps towards it and celebrate those. Because it was like, I started with 24-page children's books. Actually, I started with journals. They didn't have words. My first book that I self-published was just a journal, empty. But I'll never forget the feeling of, I now had a physical book in front of me, so I knew I could do it. I was like, okay, I figured out the process. But before I looked at it, it was like, I want to be a #1 selling author. And then I was like, it seemed too far away. But with each book, I learned how to do something new. So when I wrote this, You Butter, Reduce the Wine, Recipes for Life, Cooking and Disasters. So I did put a lot of my personal stories in there, which was an opportunity for me and freeing to say some things out loud. And it was kind of part of my healing process too, because I've had a negative relationship with food my whole life. And some of the stuff in there are meals that I used to binge eat. And I don't necessarily have a good relationship with those meals, but I have good stories that go with them. And so it's like a lot of positive can come with some of that negative. So to be able to write this book and be honest with everyone for the first time was terrifying and empowering all at the same time. It also made me realize that I have a lot that I could share with everyone that might help somebody else.
Melanie had one rule, though, when writing her cookbook that perhaps no other author has ever followed. She wasn't allowed to change anything she put down on paper. a moment that would mark the first time she would ever show up in the world exactly as herself.
Not editing it was the biggest struggle, and not allowing those intrusive thoughts of, should I put it like that or should I word it differently? Because I feel like somebody else would word it differently or safeguard it, but I had to just be like, no, this is me, I'm writing it as me, and it came out that way for a reason, and I did it without holding back at all. And some of it is very, very random. But the reality is that's what happens in my mind all day, because I'm unmedicated ADHD. And there's a stigma that comes with that. You know, like, how are you gonna write a book unmedicated on ADHD? Well, you can, it's just gonna be all over the place, and that's what happened. And there is humor in that. You know, like the fact that I didn't realize until I got my published copy back, and I was like, oh, I think I forgot halfway through I was writing it in chapters, and then that was out the window. And I was like, well, it's published, so no going back. I think I only made it to chapter 3, and then I forgot I was doing it in chapters. So it's just one ongoing situation. So don't ever limit yourself based on what you're going through or what label you've been given for whatnot. You can still do it. It's just going to be in your own way and in your own time and authentic to yourself.
I loved hearing Melanie talk about her journey in writing these books, because we all just disqualify ourselves, the imposter syndrome, and then you end up going to your grave never having done the thing because you never gave yourself permission to do it.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the things you've learned watching your daughter go through
She's
this?
amazing. I will tell you that. She's amazing. I'm her mom, so I've seen the struggle she's gone through, and it's been heartbreaking. It's hard to sit back and watch your kids. That'll make me cry. Yeah. It's hard to see them struggle. But then when I finally stepped back and was like, she's gotta do her own thing. So to watch her kind of go through that transformation, seeing that's,
Has it inspired anything in you? I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh.
is there something you haven't given yourself permission to do or be or become because keeping up this mask or this veil of like, it has to look a certain way?
That's a really good question. I would probably write like Melanie. And I stopped singing because I wasn't perfect. And somebody made a comment about it. And I mean, I had a good voice, and I'm like, why? I like to sing. So I would probably do that.
Writing books changed my life. Ever since I kind of gave myself permission to be myself alone and then be myself out loud, it's opened more doors for me and given me more opportunity to further become just myself and not worry about the other stuff. And it's helping generationally things moving forward, breaking that barrier.
Can you say hi to the camera?
Hi, camera.
Say I love you.
We can talk about it, and my mom talking about it helps me understand that this has been a repeat thing. I can talk to my kids about it, and creating a safe space for it to be normalized to talk about it is gonna change their kids' life. It is encouraged that they can be themselves, and that looks a little messy sometimes, and that's okay. But the most important thing is to be able to be honest with yourself and then with everyone else about what you have going on.
And she's taking that voice and she's using it. And I want to do the same thing, because maybe we can help each other. It's strength in numbers, right? Yeah, we're doing this. We're breaking these chains.